Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation. Tonight, we'll be bringing you 2 extra-large helpings of the push for growth and tax cuts. While the Chancellor told Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel this morning,
I don't think it's going to be possible to do any big tax cuts on the basis, first of all, of the public finances as we see them, because our debt interest payments have gone up a lot, but also because it would compromise our battle against inflation.
The former Prime Minister Elizabeth Truss said this later in the day.
I'm calling upon the Chancellor at the autumn statement to put corporation tax back down to 19%. And frankly, if we can get it lower, the better.
Agreement with both of them, and I'm going to try and square the circle as we talk about this as time goes on. This conference is a golden chance to reignite conservatism. Britain's economy needs unleashing. We ought to scrap death duties, reverse the corporation tax rise, streamline wasteful Whitehall, tackle the problem of 5.4 million working-age people on out-of-work benefits, and of course, cancel, abolish, get rid of HS2. And speaking of which, there's been much talk today suggesting that the Prime Minister could be set to announce the cancelling of the northern leg of high-speed rail 2 that would come right here, or would have come right here, to the city of Manchester. This would be a right step in the long march of cutting waste, so as to cut taxes. And finally, the British Empire, it's under attack. In response to the Argentinians withdrawing from a cooperation agreement over the Falkland Islands, the Foreign Secretary has announced a visit to the overseas territory in solidarity. But another overseas territory is under attack too. Britain is set to hand over the Chagos Islands to an ally of the Chinese Communists amidst a contentious UN court ruling. State of the Nation starts now. Defiantly holding the State of the Nation flabellum tonight is Britain's longest ever serving political editor, now proudly GB News' senior commentator, the great Nigel Nelson. As always, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's what we've been waiting for, the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you and good evening to you. Well, the top story tonight from the GB newsroom is that the Greater Manchester Mayor says axing the northern leg of HS2 would be the desperate act of a dying government. That, as a Number 10 source told GB News earlier today, that no decisions have as yet been taken. Andy Burnham has called on the Prime Minister to end the shambles on HS2 following increased speculation about the rail project's future. A number of government ministers have also called for the project to be reviewed due to spiralling costs. Well, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says it shouldn't cost 10 times more to build a railway in the UK than just across the Channel in France. And the Chancellor has also announced plans to freeze the expansion of the civil service and reduce its numbers to pre-pandemic levels. During his speech at the Conservative Party conference in Manchester today, Jeremy Hunt said it would save the government £1 billion next year. Meanwhile, he announced tougher benefit sanctions on those who are capable of working but choose not to, and a national living wage rise to £11 an hour.
We promised in our manifesto to raise the national living wage to 2/3 of median income, ending low pay in this country. At the moment, it's £10.42 an hour, and we're waiting for the Low Pay Commission to tell us next year's recommendation. But I confirm today, whatever that recommendation, we'll increase the national living wage to at least £11 an hour next year. That's a pay rise for 2 million workers.
Well, Liz Truss called on the Chancellor to cut corporation tax back to 19% from 25% in his next autumn statement. Speaking at a fringe rally today in Manchester, the former Prime Minister urged the Tory leadership to axe the tax, cut bills and build homes. Her comments come after Jeremy Hunt told GB News no substantial tax cuts were possible this year. But Ms Truss said businesses are now choosing not to locate in the UK and they shouldn't be treated like a cash cow. A second police force is investigating allegations against the comedian Russell Brand. In a statement, Thames Valley Police said it's received new information relating to harassment and stalking allegations dating back to 2018. They added it would be inappropriate to comment on an ongoing investigation. It follows a joint investigation by the Sunday Times and Channel 4. Russell Brand himself denies all accusations of criminality. And lastly, junior doctors and consultants were on strike today in a 3-day walkout, the longest ever period of joint strike action. Until Thursday morning at 7 o'clock, they'll deliver what's being described as a Christmas Day level of staffing. Their last joint strike in September led to almost 130,000 appointments having to be rescheduled. The government says the walkout is doing a massive disservice to patients. That's your latest news. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome to the Tory Party conference. I'm sitting here in one of the main halls. There's still a hubbub going on of excitement of all the discussions that have been taking place today. The most important one is about growth and how do you make our economy grow, because we've been falling behind the United States and countries that have been leading the pack. Yes, we've been ahead of sclerotic Germany and France, but we've been falling behind the more dynamic nations. And this matters because if we have economic growth, we all become better off and we allow people to achieve their natural human ambition of ensuring that their children and their grandchildren are more prosperous than they are. And there are various aspects of this. There's the tax aspect and there's the regulation aspect. And within the regulation aspect, there's all the discussion to have about green regulations. But let's focus on tax, because that's where Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister, made most of an impact earlier on today. And she really stated a conservative case, a case that Jeremy Hunt would not disagree with. But of course, you can't expect a Chancellor to announce tax cuts anywhere other than in the House of Commons. So it may be that better news will come from him. Wait and see, hold your breath. But let's talk about the rationale for tax cuts and for a more efficient tax system. Because there are efficient and inefficient taxes. What does the government aim to do? Well, it has to raise money from taxpayers to pay for public services, defence of the realm, the police, welfare, pensions, the health service, in a way that is the least economically damaging. And some taxes are more economically damaging than others. Income tax and VAT, or sales taxes, are efficient, pretty much seamless taxes because they're paid from things that have to happen. You have to be paid, unless tax is so high you become a volunteer. And the money that is taken by the state is taken at a point at which you receive it. So you don't have to do anything else other than allow the transaction to take place. Capital taxes are much less efficient because you don't need to sell an asset, and therefore capital gains tax is voluntary. You don't need to move house, so stamp duty tends to be voluntary. Death duties, oddly, are also voluntary because there is not, you can't choose not to die, I'm aware of that, but they are basically voluntary because there are ways of organising your affairs so that you don't pay them. These taxes are very inefficient and bear down on economic growth, and it's why they're the ones that should be at the forefront of reform. Why are death duties so inefficient? Well, they encourage people to distort the allocation of capital. And the allocation of capital, investment, is what leads to economic growth. But you're discouraged from investing in the stock market and encouraged to invest in farmland because of death duties. This is extremely inefficient and stops the economy from growing. But our whole tax system has become sclerotic and complex because the government wants people to do things it thinks are good rather than allowing people to choose for themselves. But you, ladies and gentlemen, understand that you make better choices for yourself than I can for you or that ministers can for you. So you want to restore personal choice by having lower taxes and a more efficient tax system. And that means doing what Ronald Reagan did in the 1980s. What did he do? He cut the tax rates, but simultaneously cut exemptions, those things you could use to write off taxes, because that encouraged people just to earn as much as they could and then pay a fair level of tax. Applies to corporation tax particularly, where complex write-offs make the system more difficult and unwieldy to use. Simple tax, low tax, economically efficient taxes actually is what will pay for public services. That's what Liz Truss and I were talking about earlier. As always, I want to hear from you. Don't forget to let me know your thoughts. You know the email by now, mailmog@gbnews.com. With me to discuss these intricate matters, I'm joined by GB News' business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, and our mighty flabellum holder, GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. Nigel, isn't it sensible to get a tax system that actually has lower rates and fewer write-offs? Because we know from experience that that raises more money and has lower economic impact.
Yes, where I agree with you is it's absolutely right to try and take some of the complexities out of the tax system. That's fine. Where I don't agree with you is that we should be cutting taxes now. Two reasons for this. Firstly, that I agree with Jeremy Hunt that inflation has got to be got under control before we actually get rid of, we start lowering taxes. I don't agree with Jeremy Hunt that a 5% decrease in inflation is somehow a 5p in the pound boost to income. If we had zero inflation at the moment, the food has still gone up 25% since 2019. It's still that much more expensive. But certainly, get rid of the complexities. Equally, I think the Tory party needs to go back to where it used to be. Tax cuts are an aspiration. Suddenly they become an obsession.
Okay, and do you think it's a problem for the Tory party? And we can have a couple of clips. Liz Truss's speech today and the Chancellor's speech, perhaps setting a different tone. Let's hear what Liz had to say.
So let's start with axing the tax. We need to unleash business across Britain. We need people to want to invest in our country. We need businesses to be able to expand, to grow, to create new jobs, to create new ideas. That's why I'm calling upon the Chancellor at the autumn statement to put corporation tax back down to 19%. And frankly, if we can get it lower, the better.
And Jeremy Hunt took a rather different line, which is also worth listening to.
no tax cuts are possible in a substantial way at the moment. So it's not just inheritance tax, it's income taxes, all the different taxes that people look at. If we start having big tax cuts, it would be inflationary. And when we've got inflation at 6.7%, it's come down a lot, but it needs to come down a lot more. And the fastest way we can give help to families who are finding life really tough is to get inflation right down. And that's the priority of me and the Prime Minister.
Nigel, is that what chancellors always say when they're not doing an autumn statement or a budget, or does he really mean it?
Oh, I think he really means it. I mean, he's going a stage further about taxation. He's not saying, I'll tell you about it at the autumn statement or the budget. What he's saying is, I'm ruling them out, which I think is the right thing to do. And the obsession you've got about taxation at the moment, what worries me a bit is it's not taking into account the things that we've neglected for 50 years. The aging population, the effect on the NHS of that, how we've neglected pensions so they're going through the roof. All these things could have been dealt with if politicians had the courage and weren't frightened of the voters some time ago.
But Liam, isn't the answer to all of this growth? And you're not going to get growth if you have the highest tax take that we've had in 70 years.
Well, I must say the atmosphere at the Liz Truss Fringe meeting, which you spoke at, which I chaired, it reminded me of the church scene in the Blues Brothers when people were backflipping down the aisle. There was a real sense of fervour. Tory activists there cheering loudly when I pointed out that Liz Truss was actually elected by activists, whereas Rishi Sunak wasn't. And I think the reason there is an obsession about tax, I agree with Nigel Nelson very much, is because, of course, the tax take as a share of GDP in this country is at a 70-year high, and we've had stealth taxes, the freezing of thresholds, so millions of not particularly wealthy people, teachers, middle managers, police officers are now paying tax at the top rate. And that, I think, is a major problem. But I do think, as Nigel says, it's a question of timing. I do believe that Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak want to cut taxes. But I think, in contrast to Liz Truss, who wants immediate tax cuts, they want to wait to get the maximum drama and kind of effect of those tax cuts. They want to wait till next spring, just before a general election, in order to enact them, in order to get the maximum impact on the electorate.
But looking at it as a political commentator, do you think the tax cuts need to be implemented before an election or about to take place as an election happens? Which is more politically powerful? Do people trust the never never?
No, I think that what happens is if you do it before the election, it looks like a sweetener to the electorate. That if you are the responsible with the economy, which is what Jeremy Hunt says he is, then the prudent thing to do is say, no tax cuts until we've got inflation back to the Bank of England target of 2%.
So, Liam, is it ridiculous to think that actually Liz is being very helpful to Jeremy Hunt because she's making the intellectual case for tax cuts, so that if he were to do it just before an election, he could say, look, this intellectual case has been made and it's been made by senior Conservatives. I'm not doing the election opportunistic thing. I'm doing something which actually many people have been saying I should do for some time.
I think there's something in that. I think what's also in Liz Truss's mind is preparing for a post-Sunak Conservative Party. There's an awful lot of talk here about the fact that the Conservatives, in many people's minds, will lose the next election. There's a battle of ideas going on for what sort of Conservative Party is going to inherit that post-Sunak crown. I don't think for a minute Liz Truss is going to become Tory leader again, but she does want to be somebody who crowns the next Tory leader. And just on the idea of responsibility, yes, of course it's irresponsible to go for tax cuts in a situation where there's lots of public spending obligations. On the other hand, the electorate is also noticing that the second biggest item on the government's balance sheet at the moment is debt interest. We're paying £110 billion a year in debt interest, an absolutely enormous sum, more than we spend on education, more than we spend on defence, second only to the NHS, and that is a function of big government and big spending.
Well, I think we're going to have to draw stumps there, though I do have a sympathy for funded tax cuts. Thank you to Nigel and Liam. Don't forget to let me know what you think, mailmog@gbnews.com, after the break. The message is, I'll be asking the former Trade Secretary, Liam Fox, whether it's time to free Britain from the stranglehold of relentless regulation. Plus, Britain's overseas territories are under attack, and we have just the man to defend them.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan.
That are affecting small businesses, VAT threshold, business rates and so on, because if we can give a strong signal to that grouping that the Tory party is on their side, that's an awful lot of voters and a lot of potential prosperity.
That would be fundamentally important, and the VAT threshold is something where people deliberately don't do business because if they cross the threshold they become 20% less competitive.
It makes people risk averse at a time we actually want people to be more entrepreneurial, and we need to deal with one other issue which you are, of course, are very au fait with, which is access to capital. We need to make sure that those small businesses have genuine access to flexible capital. Otherwise, we will lose, as we do, people to the United States and losing our IP with it.
And you're absolutely right to highlight small business, because big business actually likes regulation, doesn't it, and lobbies the government for regulation to keep competitors out.
Well, and that is the nature of the corporate world. It's cosy. It has cosy relationships with governments around the world. We need to be the disruptive force in that. We need to set our creative entrepreneurs free from not just from regulation, but these fiscal ties around their neck. And we need to, I think as a party, recognise that this is the natural home we're the natural home for these voters, and we've got to be serious about it. In 1979, Mrs. Thatcher didn't just sell council houses. She cut the price by 30 to 50% to make sure that, as she said, people understand that I'm serious. We need to do something similar.
Nigel, if we did this, it'd be a real challenge for Labour, which doesn't like white van man. I mean, you remember the by-election when a senior Labour figure tweeted disparagingly about the St George's flag being displayed. There's a sort of condescension to white van man from the Labour Party.
Well, that was just from one person, in fairness.
But it symbolised.
So I think that you won't be surprised that my politics differ from the two of you, and probably a slightly to the left of you both. I do think regulations.
It's a low bar.
I do think the regulation is important. The free market can't be totally free, which is why it must be regulated. You can't have a guy climbing a ladder without some health and safety regulations to go with that. You couldn't drive your car safely if you didn't have a whole set of regulations that keep you on the road. The question obviously is which regulations to get rid of. And I was astonished about the idea that we would suddenly get rid of 3,500 EU laws just like that. I know it's been we've gone back on that now, but just the mere idea of doing that without examining them, I think, is extremely dangerous.
But it didn't happen. So
it didn't happen because they rode back on it.
It didn't happen because the Prime Minister decided that what was important was the nature of the regulation, not the origin of the regulation, which was quite right. That's a sensible thing to do. But that doesn't mean that we can't have a serious look at deregulation. We're having an issue at the moment, for example, of imported meats. We're maintaining the EU standards, which is massively over-regulated about foodstuffs coming into the UK. There's no phytosanitary reason why we can't have that. We've got to be pragmatic about it. We're not saying to put people at risk, but what we are saying is where we can open up our economy, where we can make things cheaper for consumers by having better imports, let's do that. Let's use the market to make our economy more creative, more entrepreneurial, and reduce our costs.
Do that gradually, because you then scrutinise each particular regulation.
That's fine, but let's do it.
But I'm
saying the principle is the key thing.
Liam's principle is you're on the side of small businesses and consumers, whereas regulation is on the side of big business and bureaucracy.
Well, no, I don't think that's fair. I go back to my man climbing the ladder again. That would be he's likely to be a small, or he's likely to be a small businessman or woman. Those are regulations that are important. I'm not saying that every regulation that we've got should be set in stone and always kept. You look at each one and decide what you do with them.
Well, as it happens, I agree with you on ladder regulations, but that's one regulation that I think is important. Thank you to Liam and Nigel. After the break, HS2. Should it stay or should it go? After a week of rumours of scrapping the northern leg of the initiative, should the Prime Minister use his party conference speech to announce that the pricey project will be cancelled? Or should he keep going to level up at least part of the country that's going to have the train running on it? Plus, is it a case of the Empire striking back?
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Peter says, "Dear Mr. Rees-Mogg, show me the law that tax is legal, remembering that the Magna Carta trumps legislation." Now, there is a law of 1292 that gives Parliament the right to charge taxation. It is statute law, and Magna Carta, interestingly, is also brought into statute law in the 13th century. Pat says, what short-term memories people have, demand to support industry and individuals was high during the pandemic, as was public health spending. This produced massive government spending for which we now have to pay. And the Act of 1290-something was the Act on Tallage, so that you know. There's been quite an exchange of views over the future of the railways in the past week. There's a wonderful Flanders and Swan song on them. Anyway, rumours circulated that the Prime Minister plans to cancel the northern leg of the flagship HS2 rail project introduced by David Cameron and Gordon Brown, really, though it may be more of a Titanic than a flagship nowadays. Today, it was briefed to GB News that Mr. Sunak may use his main conference speech on Wednesday to announce officially that he will axe the Birmingham to Manchester leg. But subsequently, a government source has told GB News that there have been no decisions made. Yesterday, GB News' Camilla Tominey asked the Levelling Up Secretary, Michael Gove, whether HS2 should go to Manchester. Here's what he had to say.
Should it go to Manchester?
Well, I think we need to make sure that we're getting absolute value for money
Mr. Gove,
from it.
come on, you must be able to have an opinion on whether it should go to Manchester or not.
I absolutely think the most important thing is making sure that when we level up, we take into account all of the things that we need to do. So we've shifted Arts Council funding.
I know, but should it go to Manchester,
research
yes or
and development
no?
funding. Well, we're going to have to...
Should it? Not will it?
We're going to have to look at every conceivable pound that we spend on transport in order to make sure that we get value for money from it.
And this rather reminds me of the Weebles who wobble but don't fall down, in case you've forgotten.
Hey, look at me and Weeble. The Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. Romperoo makes Weeble toys.
That was a marvellous example of Weebles wobbling, but they don't fall down. And whether HS2 does or not, I don't know. But the prospect of losing this new infrastructure has reignited the row over whether it should go ahead or not. Many have welcomed the prospective abandonment on the grounds of inefficiency, a lack of affordability, whereas some other MPs from all sides have expressed anger and frustration at the idea, with many arguing that the initiative is essential for levelling up and for the future prosperity of the north of England. So HS2, should it stay or should it go? Well, we asked the great people of the Tory Party conference in Manchester, and the people have spoken.
HS2 shouldn't be scrapped. No. Why not? Because it's going to be a great investment for rail, link the north and the south, and we need to give investment to the north. There's loads in the south, so it needs to be even.
Should never have started in the first place. It's the Treasury Green Book didn't pass it. It was a political decision.
Yes. Why is that? Because I believe the connectivity in the northeast could much more benefit from the scrappage of HS2.
I can't possibly answer that question because obviously I'm not a Mancunian, and I think it's really up to the people in Manchester. If they want it and they stick up for it, then maybe they'll get it. It just might take a bit of time.
No, I don't think it should. It's because it's such an important part to that infrastructure, especially in the UK.
I'm joined now by Frank McKenna, the Chief Executive of Downtown in Business. Mr. McKenna, thank you for joining me. I mean, this project's massively over budget. The economic return from it is now negative. Isn't it sensible to cut now rather than carry on pouring good money after bad?
Good evening, Jacob. Good to join you. I would say no to the final question, but agree entirely with your premise that the costs of this project have got totally out of control, and we should be asking questions as to why that's happened. Any project that goes 14 years plus before we start to see any sign of it being delivered in the north is simply unacceptable. It comes back to some of the points that you've been making around business-friendly policies and regulation. And if you look at the way in which this project has been basically bogged down with all of that type of regulation, NIMBYism, the bureaucracy that people have had to go through to get plans approved, the fact that we've had to spiral costs out of control in order to, as I say, bow down to NIMBYism. They're the sort of things that really have cost this project really very, very dearly. And I would say to you, Jacob, that, if you're a government that's been in power for 14 years, you've got to take total responsibility for those costs going out of control. And then you have to ask yourself the question, we spent now £33 billion on a line that goes from Birmingham to nowhere. Now, I don't think we can afford to waste that sort of money. And I think what we should be doing is look to see if we can control costs moving forward, get those costs under control, bring that £100 billion figure that's been quoted down. But ultimately, final point I'll make, and I'll let you back in. We talk about £100 billion. This will be £100 billion for a scheme that will see us way into the next century. And you mentioned the Magna Carta in 1292. That's the last time we had...
Go into the Magna Carta, because Frank, hold on, you made a very important point. You said we've spent 33 billion, therefore we should spend the next 67 billion. That, to me, is the sunk cost fallacy. The 33 million is gone, but we would now spend an extra 67 billion and still not have a good enough railway.
Well, I think we would have a much, much better railway. And again, I would say to you that I think we could still start to control costs better moving forward with some of the things actually Liz Truss was saying this afternoon. Cut regulation, become business friendly, get private sector investors confident again in putting money up for these infrastructure projects. You know and I know that we are absolutely atrocious at delivering big infrastructure projects, although not so bad in London. Again, I remember the controversy over the Elizabeth line. I remember the controversy over the Channel Tunnel. I remember the controversy over Wembley. All London-based projects that ran over...
Frank. I'm going to try and get a word in edgeways, fish slice, but thank you very much. That's another Flanders and Swan joke, one of my favourites. But thank you, Frank. Still with me is GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Nigel, the crux of it, to my mind, is just because you've spent 33 billion, you shouldn't go on to spend 67 billion when you know that it's too expensive and it's not giving you the economic return that you expect. If there's 67 billion to spend, there are so many better ways to spend it.
Well, I mean, this is your sunk cost fallacy, and the question is whether it's a fallacy. So what it depends on, really, is whether there will be a public benefit by completing HS2. I appreciate it's gone way over cost, and I'm sure if we were thinking about building it now, we simply wouldn't. That's because the whole nature of work has changed. There's 4-day weeks, there's flexible working at home. I appreciate both you and Michael Gove don't like those things, but they actually exist. We can now do Zoom calls much more easily. We probably wouldn't need HS2 now. But we have got as far as we have. I think there would be a benefit to the whole country to have a high-speed rail going all the way north and south, and that's why it should continue.
But wouldn't it be better spent on the roads? That economically, money spent on roads has a much higher return. And just driving here on Sunday, the M6 on a Sunday afternoon is chock-a-block. There are so many ways of spending money on infrastructure that would really help the north of England, or north and Midlands.
You really don't want to get to net zero at all, do you? I mean, the whole point is that we're not spending money on roads. The idea is...
No, I want an efficient economy, and we're not going to get to net zero on our own. The Chinese are pumping out all of our emissions plus every year.
Yes, indeed, and a small change in China goes much further than a big change here. But if we want the moral leadership that we purport to want for net zero, therefore we've got to do our bit as well.
But actually, if we have all the electric cars that you want, then having wide roads that can take lots of cars and have no congestion is a thoroughly good thing.
Yes, in which case then let's keep to the target of getting rid of petrol and diesel by 2030.
But let's widen the roads, because then you can argue, and then we can argue about the target separately.
Yeah.
But you definitely want to widen roads and make life easier for the motorist, and stop obsessing by the 19th century romanticism of the railways.
Well, but the whole thing is that if you're looking at public transport, our choices are railways and buses, unless you fly everywhere. Flying is not a very good idea. That obviously rail certainly is the most environmentally best way of actually doing it.
87% of journeys are taken by road.
Well, but that's what we have to change.
But we're not going to change it.
If you have a decent high-speed rail system, it might actually change.
But this is brilliant. I'm so glad you're on, because this is socialism. You think you should tell people how to lead their lives and make them go on the trains, whereas I think you want to get in your car, the government must facilitate you going in your car.
Well, in which case then we're back then to not reaching net zero by 2050.
Not necessarily if you get all your electric cars.
In which case then don't change the 2030 target.
That'll take time. And we might get hydrogen cars anyway. I think hydrogen's potentially very interesting.
Yeah, probably not for cars. No, but the infrastructure must be in place. You must have a place where you can actually charge up your car. I can't round my area. I looked at an electric car. I can't use one. Those are things that need to be dealt with.
But doesn't it, under all circumstances, make it more sense to spend money on motorways and cars? Because if you have your way and net zero is the thing, you can spend it on charging points, you can spend it on subsidies for electric cars, all these sorts of things. If I have my way, I'm much less worried about that, but I still want people to be able to use their cars on roads that are clear.
Is your argument there, Jacob, that what you do is the money you save from HS2 we put into electric cars?
No, what I'm saying is that we waste an enormous amount of money on railways because we have a romantic 19th century view of the railways, and we need to spend that money on motoring. And first of all, I would widen roads and get rid of pinch points, because that has the greatest economic bang for your buck, or bang for your pound sterling.
Yeah, I mean, as a commuter, I'm not very nostalgic about the railways, but I do like the idea of having a high-speed rail that connects pretty much the entire country. And we've been vacillating for too long about this. I know about the costs going up. We did the same thing with our super carriers that Tony Blair brought in. David Cameron wanted to cancel them, found he couldn't. I rather hope we'll find ourselves in the same situation with HS2.
Well, thank you very much, Nigel. Coming up, I'll be asking why the government is selling out to China in the Indian Ocean while defending the Falklands in the South Atlantic.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. After the last segment, you may think I identify as Mr. Toad, but in fact, I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your male Moggs. Richard on Chagos Island. We cannot allow this. The next target will be the Isle of Wight. And Alan, if the French can build high-speed railways for 1/10 the cost of UK builders, why not pay them to build HS2? Well, that's a très bonne idée, mon ami. Earlier this year, the Argentinian government, in a fit of the vapours, decided to withdraw unilaterally from a cooperation agreement with the UK and then called for talks over the Falklands, the very same Falkland Islands that already had a vote, a referendum on its status as a British overseas territory in 2013. The result was 1,513 voted to stay part of the UK, and an amazing, if possibly rather brave, total of 3 people voted to leave. You'd think the matter was settled. But late last night, the Foreign Secretary announced his intention to visit the Falklands in an act of solidarity. However, another British overseas territory is under attack. And whilst the Falklands move is encouraging from the Foreign Secretary, it seems that the UK is on the precipice of handing over the British Indian Ocean Territory to Mauritius, a close ally of Communist China, owing to a contentious UN court judgment that we ought to have ignored. So, with me now to discuss this is the director of the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation, Niall Gardner, and GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. Niall, Margaret Thatcher would have been appalled, wouldn't she, at this surrender of sovereignty by the quisling Foreign Office?
I think she would have been appalled. This is absolutely outrageous. Boris Johnson is 100% right to condemn this. This is a spineless and cowardly move. It is not in the British national interest. It fundamentally undermines, I think, British security, but also the US-UK special relationship. After all, we're talking here about the Diego Garcia military base, which is leased to the United States and will be in the hands of Mauritius, a close ally of China. So this decision makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It needs to be reversed, and the British national interest has to be put to the front. British security has to be at the very forefront here.
It's a complete abrogation of security in the interests of a relatively obscure court on a not very strong case.
Exactly, and I do not know why the British government is going along with this ridiculous ruling from this international court. British sovereignty and self-determination matters, and the UK should not be subject to the ruling of foreign courts.
Nigel, it's a bit ridiculous, isn't it? The Foreign Secretary goes off to the Falklands, which isn't really at any risk, whilst handing over the Chagos Islands. It's all smoke and mirrors.
Well, I mean, one in fact is related a bit to the other, that we all believe in the Falklands Islanders having the right to self-determination. They want to remain British, therefore that we're happy to keep them British, and we fought a war to ensure that they carried on being British. What we did in the Chagos Islands is remove the population against their will. They had no self-determination about that. They had no choice in the matter. How would we have felt if we shifted a couple of thousand people from Cheshire because we wanted to build a base there?
The key element to the ruling is that we did a deal with Mauritius when Mauritius was still a colony, and the court has said that a deal done with a colony is invalid, which means our withdrawal agreement with the EU is invalid because we were de facto a colony when we signed that agreement. So it's pretty dodgy international
Well, not really.
law.
We weren't a colony of the EU.
We were under their law.
But in this particular case, it is the UN International Court of Justice. It's an advisory.
It's an advisory court. It's not a...
No, I appreciate it's an advisory, but the idea, I mean, Niall is talking about let's leave this one, along with all the talk about leaving the European Court of Human Rights, the migration, the Refugee Convention. Can we actually join the rest of the world?
Well, no, let's join the United States, which has the sense not to take any notice of these pretend courts.
Well, but the whole thing is we're always arguing that every time an international court goes against us, we should either ignore it or leave their jurisdiction.
Because I don't think they're proper courts. Well, they don't follow the jurisprudence of the UK courts. They don't have the common law. They are very political, particularly in the UN.
So you wouldn't like, so again, you'd say the same thing...
I think we should never have signed up to the International Criminal Court. I think that was a great mistake.
OK, but you'd also say the same thing about the European Court of Human Rights.
Oh, yes, I would. I think the time's come to pull out of that.
So when it comes down to international judicial frameworks...
I think our protection of rights is Parliament and the British people. I don't think it is unaccountable courts which operate for very political reasons.
But we belong to the rest of the world.
Yes, and you're absolutely right, Jacob. Britain should not be subject to the rulings of foreign supranational courts. I mean, this is outrageous. It's an affront to British.
What about NATO?
And NATO is
we're talking about sovereignty, though.
It's not a supranational entity at all.
But if you're talking about
sovereign nation states working together.
But if you're talking about sovereignty and therefore pulling out of international courts because of sovereignty, we have the same situation with NATO.
It's entirely different.
We are perfectly happy to hand over our sovereignty to NATO.
But we haven't handed any sovereignty at all to NATO.
Yes, we have.
We have zero.
No.
Zero.
If an attack on one member is an attack on all, we have no choice about going to war if France is attacked.
No, that's not true. It is a request for help. It is not a declaration of war.
Yeah,
Article 5 is misunderstood. It is not an automatic thing.
NATO is not a supranational entity at all. It's an alliance of nations working together in order to advance the security of the West, and that's why it's so effective.
So if the Russians actually rolled over the border into Poland and then down towards Germany and France, we wouldn't do anything?
Well, we're going to defend our allies, free nations.
But it's a free choice.
Against barbarism and against evil.
So you reckon we have a choice about not doing anything?
Well, I would hope that we would support Poland. I mean, but it is a choice. It's not automatic.
Yeah, entirely different circumstances.
The global security issue, China is coming up the ranks as a real threat to the UK, the US, to the Western world, and we are handing it a major security opportunity.
Absolutely. I do think this decision to go along with this international court is absolutely insane. And it basically gives a strategic advantage to the Chinese. The Chinese would dearly love to have possession of Diego Garcia, a strategically important military base. And so this is an act of self-sabotage, self-harm to go along with this court decision. It makes no sense whatsoever.
Well, thank you very much to Niall and Nigel. That's all from me. Up next is Mark Dolan. Mark, you're in Paddington. What's on your menu, your bill of fare this evening?
Well, Jacob, a busy show tonight. In my digest, I've written Rishi Sunak's keynote speech so he doesn't have to. My manifesto to put the great back into Britain. In the clash, is Britain once again the lazy man of Europe? And as Nigel Farage gets a rapturous reception at conference, should the right come together to keep Starmer out of number 10? Plus, is the axing of HS2 a betrayal of the North? Lots to get through tonight. We're live from 9.
Oh, well, that sounds extremely interesting, and definitely we should bring the right together. I look forward to that programme. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and you'll be amazed to know, in Manchester, I brought a raincoat with me, which you would think from Somerset is an unnecessary accoutrement. But it does occasionally rain, even in sunny Somerset, where the weather tomorrow will be glorious. Not so sure about Manchester.
Evening, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Bright and breezy sums up tomorrow. A bit of a grey start in the south, and there will be some showers, particularly across the north and the west. Overnight, some pretty heavy rain moving in. A very soggy one out there right now, thanks to this area of low pressure. Some intense downpours, even the odd rumble of thunder likely over the Midlands and eastern parts of England over the next few hours. Could be very wet indeed for a time across parts of Norfolk especially. But that all tends to scoot away through the early hours. Many places will become dry, certainly across Scotland and Northern Ireland, some clear spells. A little chilly here.